Okay, so as Amy mentioned, we've got a lot of projects this upcoming year, and we've got some projects that have been built. I'll talk a little bit about how we're selecting grades for those and that sort of thing. As you can see, there's different ways to write down an SPG grade. On the left, you see just your basic SPG grading systems, and they look a lot like PG grades. You're specifying a high temperature and a low temperature to get the grade for the climate you want, and that's generally for your hot applied seal coat binder. But we also want to preserve the option of having emulsions, and the same grading system should apply to the residue from the emulsion as it does to the hot applied binder. And so we have in that spec, if you look at the spec that's on the TxDOT website right now, it allows you to choose between 3 different types of emulsions, and those are CRS, HFRS, and CHFRS. And so those are your cationic and anionic versions of rapid setting emulsions, which are what we typically use for seal coat binders. And so if for instance, your grade that you want to specify is an SPG 73-25, well, you could say, I want that to be emulsion, and call out a CRS2 SPG 73-25, and that's what gets you the emulsion SPG seal coat binder. And so that's kind of the way that system works. One caution about this is to realize that an SPG 73-25, or let's look at something that's a little more recognizable, 67-16, is not going to be the same binder as that PG grade, that numerical PG grade of binder. Although the climate requirements for SPG are going to be really similar to the climate requirements for PG, because the specific parameters of the tests are different, the properties of those binders are actually going to be significantly different. So the effect of the specification that we're hoping to get are some improvements in what we have now. Right now we have a catalog of asphalts, and we pick the one that we think is going to work, but there's no relationship between what that grade is and what those materials properties are and any basis on performance. So now we're going to select binders that have properties that should be good for at least for the climate you're using them in, and that's the idea. Then we're going to modify that climate grade based on other considerations. And when we go through this with people in the districts, we kind of treat this in a similar way to what used to be the tier table, or what we're currently using as the tier table, is that we're starting out, as Amy mentioned, with a basic low volume road binder, and then having the ability, similar to the PG system, to bump that grade up to account for traffic, speed, curves in the road, and that sort of thing, all the things that make it more difficult for a seal coat to perform in the field. We're going to consider what we had for a traditional binder, meaning what did the district use before? And so, for instance, one of the first projects was the Corpus Christi project that Amy mentioned. They used an SPG 70-19. So we looked at the climate and found that they would need 67-13, and that would meet the basic climate requirements. And they knew they wanted to bump it up some because they had some traffic on that road, and they also knew that they had been using AC-15P. Well, we looked at the AC-15Ps they had been using and found that they were 70-19 in the SPG system. And so they said, well, we're very comfortable with specifying 70-19 because that's going to get us what we were already using. And in fact, the material supplier told us because it meets the grade, we're just going to supply the same binder we were using already. And so part of the process for these test projects is to make sure the district is also comfortable with what they're specifying, because we would like people to go out on a limb and really test out this specification and give it a hard test, but we'd much rather have a project than not have a project. So you really need to be comfortable with the grade you're using. And then you get the option of selecting hot applied or emulsified binders. Most of the projects up to now have been hot applied. I know at the very least the one in Brownwood that's coming up is going to be emulsion. I talked to Elias earlier and they specified emulsion SPG. That's very good. We need to get those test projects out there as well. Skip that one. There's our map. I'm not going to skip it. There's our map. This, Amy's already talked about this. If you've seen the PG binder maps, they look very similar. That's no surprise because the climate is the same in Texas, whether you're talking about PG or SPG. The difference in the climate specification is that PG looks at the temperature in the summer just below the surface of the pavement. SPG looks at the surface of the pavement because this is a seal coat. It's right on the surface. So those temperatures are going to be a little bit higher for SPG, but otherwise very similar. There was a spreadsheet that was out there that you could use to go look at your climate requirements, and I found out recently that that doesn't work anymore because we have a new version of Excel. Well, I've rewritten that. I'm going to put that back out there soon, so you'll not only be able to go look at your PG climate requirement, but your SPG requirement with the same tool. So once we implement this, the idea will be, one, that we're not going to have a grading system where a material supplier all of a sudden has a binder that they used to make or that they like to make that doesn't meet any specification. Every material will fall into the specification system somewhere. It'll simply be a matter of whether or not it's what a district is wanting to use or not. It should be a tighter spec. What we have seen from when we compare the grades that we're currently using with what the SPG grades would be is that depending on where you are in the state, what material supplier they came from, the current AC grades in particular tend to be all over the map. So those grades have very wide ranges of properties. We hope to narrow those with the SPG specification and get more consistent behavior from our binders and hopefully eliminate some seal coat problems. High-performing binders will still be high-performing binders. Amy mentioned the phase angle, which is the parameter we use to get polymer in the grades. We know that so far that is not something that's easy to fool or to sneak in an unmodified binder in place of a modified binder. And bigger modification levels help you get that wide grade range, that useful temperature interval that Amy has so much trouble saying. And then because we're using SPG and we're using grade bumping, kind of the old tier table goes away. Although we're still working on having a material selection table, and we want to preserve a couple of things in it. We want to preserve the ability to have several different levels of performance of your binder. And some people are afraid to call it tiers because they think there's going to be a rebellion or something if we call it a tier table. But that's the idea. And the ability for the contractor to have the option to use the higher performing binder on the lower performing sections if that makes sense for them to do that. And we shouldn't mind if they do that if it doesn't cost us any extra money. And we want to allow the districts to be able to specify what type of binder they want. In other words, hot applied or which type of emulsion if emulsion is what they want. So we want to have that control and that latitude with the specifications. What are the challenges? Well, the big one is we're going to a completely new specification, and everybody is nervous about making that big of a change. One thing I'd say about that is what you just saw Amy talk about is we've got a specification system that we have worked on validation with almost 150 test sections, and that's a lot of validation right there. And so I think we've done a good job of satisfying ourselves that the spec will work the way we intend it to. There's always unknown things that happen, but I think we can be pretty comfortable moving forward at this point. We've got a new recovery procedure for emulsions. It was developed several years ago in TxDOT. It's been looked at on a national level, so a lot of people have done research on this, but it's still very new, so we need to make sure everybody knows how to do that properly, is on the same page, and we can get good results from it. We're still trying to get rid of the bending beam because part of the advantage of the new recovery procedure is that we don't change the properties of the binder by heating it and mixing it and that sort of thing, and we would have to do that with the bending beam. Amy already talked about that. And the fact that if you have one grade in the SPG system, that is not the same grade of binder in the PG system. So we need to make sure everybody understands that. Those are all things we can overcome, I think. Next on the schedule, later this month, we've been working with TxAPA and their major associates, which is the asphalt binder suppliers. we're going to have a workshop with them, and the idea is to get all of the people from the asphalt suppliers together who actually test the material and walk through the specification detail by detail and make sure everybody understands the differences in the testing that we're doing here and the testing that we do for PG, which mostly they're all familiar with. And at the same time, we want to get some round robin samples out there so that we can test and compare results on identical samples to everybody in the industry and make sure that we're all doing it correctly and iron out any discrepancies as early as we can. We're still marketing stuff with TxDOT, and we're still out looking for trial projects. We're always ready for more trial projects. If there's a district that is not doing any SPG projects right now, contact me, contact Amy. We'll coordinate on that. And you know, the thing to remember about that is you'll be using a different binder specification, but it doesn't change the way you build the seal coat. It just means that we'll need to get together and select the right grade of binder, and then you'll want to coordinate with TTI so they can get out there and collect data, collect samples, monitor the project, and that sort of thing. So it should be pretty easy to do those things. And then once we implement on a statewide basis, then we'll really see what happens as far as changes in binder formulations that we get from our material suppliers. We won't really know that until that's all we're asking for, because as I mentioned right now, in a lot of cases, they're just supplying a binder that they already make under a different name, which is okay, but you always discover the new things when the spec is changed statewide. And then we've got backup slides, evidently. So I think we're done. Yeah. Any questions? Must have answered all. Okay.
I just wanted to mention one thing. Jerry mentioned that if a supplier has a grade, a 64 minus 22, for example, we looked at a couple of 64 minus 22 from 2 different suppliers here in Texas and determined their SPG grades, just so people kind of would understand that they might be able to still have that same grade and use it in hot mix and use it in seal coats. So one of them was a 70 minus 16, and the other one was a 67 minus 10. So there's definitely some differences, and there's differences from the PG system to the SPG system. So just to give you an idea, that higher temperature is going to be a little higher, and the lower temperature is probably going to be a little bit warmer. So I just wanted to let you guys know, because I think that's kind of important information.